And soccer does have a certain degree of level changes, but the one who has to do that the most is the goalie,
Mm.
because the other players can't go down and stop the ball with their hand. As where softball, baseball, tennis, volleyball, back row players, they have to change levels constantly. And they have to be very stable and dynamic in those change of directions. So the more we expose them to those types of things, I today still, even when I warm up my kids, we do these things called roll and reaches that I've been using for years. And that's changing levels. And some of the kids initially struggle with it, but they're getting better at it because we do it every day.
That was Lee Taft, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online sports technology store that curates the best of in various elements of training, such as timing systems with the Freelap timing system, training tools with things such as blood flow restriction training and the K-Box, athlete monitoring devices such as velocity-based training, force plates, and the VO2 Master, and much more. I choose sponsors for this show that I use their products personally, and I have been loving using blood flow restriction training this past year. The Freelap timing system has been an absolute staple for me. I've really enjoyed using bar speed tracking and the K-Box. Those and other products in their store have been a really valuable part of not just my coaching journey, but also my journey as an athlete. They have as well an amazing blog on sports performance and are a top-notch company with great customer service. Be sure to check them out, and you can do that at simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's great to have you here. In the world of athletic development, we have many facets of the equation. We have, of course, the sport itself, sports skills, coordination, the process of learning physical skills and abilities through physical education from youth to scholastic years into adulthood. We also have the strength and performance side. We have the physical strength, the range of motion and alignment, the pure power outputs. And with all these components, the more we can integrate them, the more understanding that we have of how does this fit into the grand scheme of things. If I'm the sport coach, understanding the physical raw abilities that come from a weight room setting is really beneficial. If I'm a strength coach, an athletic performance coach, knowing how athletes move on the field, how they develop over time, knowing the art of motor learning, that helps me tremendously with looking at how what I do fits right into that athletic scope of play. When it comes to the integration of both sports skill and then strength and speed, one guest who I absolutely love having on is Lee Taft. Lee is one of the most highly respected sports speed coaches in the world. His methods come from wisdom accumulated not just in sports performance, but also in physical education, sport coaching, and decades of experience doing so. Lee has been a 3-time guest on the podcast and a mentor to many high-level coaches. On the podcast today, he'll be detailing his process in terms of a learning continuum of sports skills, constraints, and then when to step in and connect the dots with what an athlete is missing. So Lee will talk about the ability to use the game, play as a screen, and then how to know when to plug in specific speed work, specific needs that we can gain from more of the hardware side of things in the gym into sport. By understanding sport, which we'll talk about a lot on this show, we can really understand that fullness of an athlete's development. And the more we can integrate, I think the more effective we can be. I always enjoy talking to Lee, and I know you guys are going to love this show. Also, before we get started, be sure to check out the show notes. We reference a few things, some exercises, for example, through the course of this episode. And if you head to justflysports.com and the page associated with Lee's podcast here, you can see in more detail a lot of what we're talking about. All right, let's get to episode 331 with Lee Taft. Lee, it's great to have you back on the show, man. I was going to ask you, I was thinking of this and watching your videos and just talking to you before the show, but what do you do for, I guess I could say workout, but for sport? Like play tennis, or basketball? What is your activity these days after spending so many years in movement and sport and all that?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Joel, for having me. I always look forward to talking to you and just kind of sharing ideas. So I appreciate you having me on. But Yeah, it's funny. This is kind of a funny story on how it happened, but I still mix around a little bit with basketball. I'm coaching basketball, so I'll, play with the kids every now and again with my son. And, we haven't played as much tennis as we were, but I love, playing tennis. But we just recently bought bikes again. We had bikes in the past and we moved and we kind of got rid of them and we just bought them. And the reason is we, as we talked a little bit off camera, we went through a pretty big hurricane and a lot of destruction. Well, where we live, one of the main bridges was taken out, a half of it. Well, the other half, there's still a little sidewalk. So to get to the grocery store, to get to even the school, to anything, if we drove, it took a long, long time because you literally had to go way around town and it just took forever. And so we bought bikes, and so we would ride a lot. And we would put our backpacks on, go to the grocery store, fill our backpacks up, drive back, and do stuff like that. So from athletically, I like to do stuff like that. Plus I mentioned playing basketball and tennis whenever possible. And of course, this where I am right now, this is kind of my little speed cave, and I love doing stuff out here. I even do stuff with, probably your listeners have heard of, like reaction balls and Z-balls, which is not a sport, but it's athletic and it's stuff I like to do because it's random. It keeps me moving. It keeps me reacting and kind of moving my feet and stuff. And so, yeah, I try to do a lot of stuff like that. But because I have a son that's 14 and really active, he keeps me active. And we go out and play football a lot and different things like that. But yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've been playing a little bit, or I should say I kind of had this intense realization that I just need to play more. I talk about it all the time and I love it. Like I'm wired for it. Back when I was at Cal, I would always try to find, someone to play like 21 basketball with or just something, whenever I could. And I get back to Ohio and I'm like kind of looking at the rec leagues or times or whatever. And finally I got connected with a group that plays Ultimate Frisbee on Friday mornings. And it's just it's only been a few weeks, but I'm like, this is so good. Like this is just like pure, I talk about like outputs a lot and all the ways to get your training all lined up. But at the end of the day, like just having fun, being with the community in a group and being explosive and random, like you said, the D-ball, like variable ways is just so, so crucial. And especially for me, I think it is for everybody, but it's just been really great to get back to that. And so, yeah, thinking about that, how to do that too on small scale, even with just little random things that fun and variability is just so important, I feel like.
It is. And it's for kids. It's great for us, but for kids, it's great because it, develops the creative mind. The solving, we always talk about that, but we don't actually allow them to do it. And to allow them to do it, you got to just get out of the way and let them go. And then they start to create and think and solve. And we have this, you ever go to like Dick's or Sporting Goods store and you can get the pretty big bucket of baseballs, those big buckets there, you can buy those, or you go to Home Depot, you get a big bucket. Well, we would always have one, my son and I, we'd put them out here. And we'd put the bucket out somewhere and we would grab a bunch of different kind of balls and we'd have to try to make it in the bucket. And, like shooting baskets, but on this little bucket, but we would say, okay, you can only make it off 2 bounces. So 1 bounce doesn't count, straight in doesn't count, it's got to go 2 bounces. So you're figuring out angle, like how high to bounce it. So the second bounce has enough height that's going to make it in. And then we would figure you got to hit 2 walls and then make it. And so like a lot of the listeners are thinking, well, that's kind of crazy. I'm like, absolutely not. That's the goal. That's the stuff that creates the creative mind and problem solving that athletes use every time they play soccer, basketball, tennis, football, whatever the sport is. They have to use problem solving to make a play. And what better way to do that than this free kind of, sampling of skill set? And that's what we would do a lot. And that's how we end up creating athletes that have more than just power and speed and basic agility. They actually have a thought process and they have a creative mind to perceive and predict things. And that's our job at the end of the day.
Yeah, just even in coaching youth soccer on the 5 and 6 year olds, I always am finding times to shut my mouth to make sure I keep my mouth shut, because I'll watch kids like literally figuring out defense as if it's zone defense in basketball. I can see them looking towards the goal, looking towards the and they're figuring it out. I'm like, all right, I'm just not going
Yeah,
to say anything. I'm going to let them figure it out. Maybe they're not even in the world's greatest position, but they'll fit, that's
that's right.
part of their process right now. And I gotta respect that. So it's,
Absolutely.
that creativity and I'll have to, it's interesting too, to think about that with, just like a bucket in different ways to throw that, and spike ball and everything that goes there.
We did one thing I did too, Joel, and I'll just mention, because it's, so all my oldest daughter is 25. My youngest is 22, going to be 23 this year. But she's still got one more year of college basketball. And then with my son, who's 14, I did these games with the kids when they were younger. We'd get in the garage or we'd go outside, and I'd give them a cone, like a cone you set down to do agility drills with. And I would throw them a tennis ball, and they had to catch it in the cone. And they got certain points for that. But we did all different ways. So like I might stand behind them, throw it over their head, and then they're looking for it. So we're developing tracking skills. And then they had to catch it in the cone, because the cone, which is 9 inches, the ones we have, 9 inches, that's 9 inches longer than their arm. So their central nervous system has to figure out, because the first few times they miss it because they're trying to catch it with where their hand would be. But no, you got another, so many inches extended. And so we would catch it in, and we'd give them point values, and I would make them lay on their back, and I'd bounce it, and they'd see it coming, and they'd have to catch it. And I'm telling you, Joe, they would keep me doing that for an hour. They just love the different stuff. But it developed great tracking skills and vision and moving their hand. So it helps with racket sports or catching games and stuff. So that's I keep saying this, but that's the stuff that creates the athlete beyond the athlete.
Mm-hmm.
We got the fast athlete, we got the combine athlete, right, who shows well in numbers. But then we got the athlete who thinks really quickly and really well and moves. And that's a different kind of athlete that I don't think we're developing as much as we used to when kids had more free play.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big topic I wanted to cover. And I've, in the sense, or in the time since we've last talked, I've been on this word a little bit. I think Rafe Kelly might have got me onto it, but the idea of atomizing, or I guess it's over compartmentalizing all the pieces of the process. Like, all right, you're going to get your skills. You're going to be on this team or travel ball team. We might talk about that a little bit today. And then you're going to get your speed here, and then you're going to get your strength here. And it's like this overserved athlete where it's not, you're never letting it all just become this, this thing where you get it all in one shot, or you're getting more pieces of it in one, I guess you could say more of a natural development. And so the question I'll have for you is, I mean, and maybe things are just, a little bit different now than they used to be. I know you talk about now versus the 90s. Things are a lot different. But with that in mind, and the wisdom you've gained over the years through seeing these changes, what is the ideal to you in terms of if you could design the optimal environment for a child to grow up in through youth, middle school, high school? What would that look like? Because I think so often we get lost. We're just like, all right, all we see is the next team. All we see maybe is the athlete who comes into us looking for speed. And that's all we're there to train them for, but to see the big picture. What is your big picture? This would be the optimal development for an athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I go into that, I think all the sports performance facilities and coaches, I think they're great if they have a great model, if they have a good model of development, and they're understanding how to actually develop the holistic athlete. And so I'm a big fan of that. Obviously, I did it for years and years. Our facility, when we did it, we really focused on kind of the hodgepodge of movement. This is real movement. I can tell you to run from this cone to that cone and back, but you'll never do that in a game. In the game, it's dependent on, the environment and the task, But so I'm good with that. But I think what we need to start to get to more of, really big. I love competition. People sometimes, competition, it makes, no. Competition is a good thing, because that's everything. Little toddlers compete for a toy, right? They're going to compete for a toy. We got, 7-year-olds are going to compete on the playground for the swing set, who gets on the swing, so that's not a bad thing at all. We got to use that. But I think what we need to do is have competition. Like, let's say we want to play soccer or whatever game it is. It could be a little basketball or maybe a little football. And we want to play, put them in situations where they have 3-on-3, where they have small-sided games. And we just want to say to them, look, okay, here's couple cones, there's your goal, or maybe you have a goal set up, or if you have a basketball goal, if you're playing that, you guys are going to play. If there's a disagreement, solve it real quick or restart the play. Just get that stuff out of the way and let them go. Let them play. Now, this is where my physical education background comes in, because when you teach 30 kids, 35 kids, and they're young kids, if you talk to them all the time, you lose them really quick. So what I used to do was get them in a game really fast. And then I'd blow the whistle real quick. All right, everybody freeze. Okay, Joel just did this. What would be another way he could have did that to pass to his teammate that was open? Oh, I know, I did that. What would you do, Lee? Well, I would pass with my outside foot rather than the inside foot because I'm strong. Great, let's do it. Ready, go. And now everybody starts playing again. So the environment of playing is critical. But if we can guide through instruction to kind of help the kids understand the game and start to learn a little bit of the tactical parts of the game and the physical parts of the game, I think that's a wonderful model to use. I do that now. I'm currently a head boys basketball coach, and I do that. We get them into their stuff. We'll break down a little bit to warm up and footwork stuff and whatever, but we play, and then I blow the whistle. What should we have done if the ball went here? What's an option that we have, guys? And they'll let me know. Okay, good. Let's do that then. Boom and go. And I think that environment, if we compare that, Joel, to the current model of travel sports, of physical education, of high school sports, young kid sports, where coaches are making kids have to listen and stop play to try something else all the time. So what happens is the kids eventually figure that, well, I know he's going to stop me, so I'm probably not going to go that hard because he's going to stop me anyway. And so we've actually lost the flow of play. So my model would be let them play, find opportunities to teach and guide, and then let them play and repeat, rinse, rinse and repeat. Just keep going like that. And then when we get opportunities during warm-ups, okay, let's see how we can run. Let's see how we can change directions. We can teach some basic stuff, little things, but let's not live there because that's not where they live in the game. We got to stay closer to the game if we want to develop, pure sport movement or athletic movement.
Yeah, and you mentioned you playing games with your kids all the time, and I imagine that as with the energy and the fun and the game-like nature you bring with their journey, I was going to ask that because they played so much. This is what I'm trying to ask. Because they were able to do so much play, what was your thoughts on them regarding like just more traditional speed drills, if that makes sense? Like them in more of a ideal environment because you had much more say, obviously, because you were their dad. How much speed? Like how much did they actually work on like more the nitty gritty of all the speed stuff versus just playing?
Right. Very little. We did it at times. If they joined a group, like sometimes they would join one of my training sessions and maybe we were doing some kind of drill, maybe like a wicket or something to work on a mechanical thing that we wanted to drive. They would do that. But what I did a lot with them is while we were playing is if they were chasing after something. I used to play this game with them with a badminton and a birdie, and I would hit it as high as far as I can, and they couldn't start chasing it until they saw me hit it. Then they'd go try to get it. Well, the great thing with that is it takes off like a rocket, but then it comes down slow. Oh, yeah. So it gave them a chance. And then what I would do, Joel, is I'd say, like Jay, my oldest daughter, who was kind of like me, very competitive, going after stuff. And I'd say, Jay, think about when you run with your arms. I'd like to see your pinky go up by your shoulder on the first couple steps. So think about it. The next thing you know, she's doing that. And now that's all I would say. I didn't talk anything else about how hard to run or this. I just gave her something that she started working on. And so those are the types of little cues that I would give them to help them accomplish catching the birdie or catching the ball or whatever. But it wasn't to them about a speed training session. It was about playing a game. And I just helped them with their speed or their change of direction by just giving them a couple little thoughts. And that's what they like. That's why they like it. And my oldest daughter, Jay, is actually coaching JV basketball right now in California. She's out there. And she reached out to me the other day and she goes, I can't believe I'm using the same stuff you used with me years ago. And my coach, but she goes, the kids love it. We're having so much fun. And I said, that's why we do it. It's if they have fun, they'll work for you and they'll come back the next day ready.
Yeah, I remember all the way back to, I think it was either the first or second podcast we did. And I asked the question something like if someone grew up in the perfect environment, they were just playing all the time, all sorts of variation, that might just be like the ideal. And then you don't need to do as much of the, like you said, maybe a little bit here and there, but they're athletic. Yeah. They get it. I had another question. I'll save it because it's more on like the natural gifted versus like the people who just need more coaching. But I love the idea of, you got it in my head now, like off-speed stuff, like a birdie, like it goes real fast and then it slows down, or even a Frisbee is kind of like that a little bit too.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, because when I do speed sessions with kids, I try to get it into something that they can chase real fast. And I like a Frisbee because it almost does give you a little time. Like if you were just working on something, like you said, you have a little time to process that versus like a baseball. I don't know if I have time to, I just got to go get it, So like off speed stuff. I mean, that seems like a really cool ground to infuse something that you might put in the athlete's mind with like, okay, now go do it.
That's right. So, the ball drop drill, we've all done it for years. You hold a tennis ball, you drop it, and they start to go. Okay. So when I would do this as a phys ed teacher, especially with my kindergartners and first grade, second graders, I would use scarves. So you take a scarf. So when I would teach juggling, you get these juggling scarves. When you throw them up, they go up and then they flutter and come down. So when I would do the ball drop concept with those kids, I'd have their partner that just hold your, scarf as high as you want. They could do whatever they want with it. And I said, let it go. And your partner has to race and try to catch it before it hits the ground. Well, see, that's an example of gravity isn't affecting that scarf like it is a tennis ball. Is going to go boink, it's going to fall really fast. That scarf, the current's going to catch it. So the kids have a chance. And then what we would do is we would take a little heavier face towel, like one of those, something like that. And they would drop that. Still doesn't drop as fast as a tennis ball because it catches the air, it opens up, but it's faster. So we started adding progressions to it, and then eventually they get to the ball, but they got to catch the ball before it bounces twice. So that's a really good way to teach the kids how to work on acceleration. Okay, we're working acceleration, but we're doing it because they're chasing something, having fun. And then we can start to talk about, hey, what if you guys were to do this and you were to actually drive your arms a little bit harder like this, and give them an example. Say, why don't you guys try that? See if it helps you get to the scarf quicker or to the ball. And let them go, let them try it. And then, it's like what we call summary feedback. Summary feedback is I say, Joel, what did you think? What do you think you could have done? You're asking them and you're kind of summarizing what is possible. And that's kind of how we would do that with these athletes. But yeah, and you had mentioned the Frisbee because, in phys ed, we did a unit on Frisbee. And the Frisbee is great because if you can teach the kid how to let it catch air versus, a nosedive those are when it comes down like a missile, they start to learn how to be able to run and catch it or how to track it, when it floats. And then, they use massive acceleration speed and then they settle into a controlled speed to be able to gather and catch the Frisbee. So, yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, you just got me thinking too. One of the most athletic things I think ever is actually, this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, watching a dog catch a Frisbee. It's it's amazing. Like it's just pure athleticism, just out like a rocket. And then they're like tracking it, and jump up and bite it.
You're right.
What you're saying too makes me just so value like all the things I did when I was a kid, like playing balloon volleyball. Like, it's like I have neighbors who have their like 7-year-olds in volleyball with a regular volleyball and like no one can even hit it. I'm just like, how nice is it to have a balloon that just like, you hit it, it goes quick, but then it floats down and you get to, make your decision to go get it, and just things that move a little bit slower. Or a beach ball. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Just things that move slower that offer opportunities or, affordances or whatever you want to call it. And
that's right. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's just so much. Whether you work with kids, it's intuitive. But even if you work with older athletes, it's just to have a few of those things around. Have a Frisbee around. Have a beach ball. Have, like you said, even like something that can fall slower if you're doing like the typical tennis ball drop. Just something that to mix that up. It just makes sense.
That's right. Yep. Sure does. and you watch them embrace it. You can see they light up and they start having fun with it. So yeah.
I haven't asked you this yet, but because I've kind of gathered this from a few different coaches. I had a lunch with Al Vermeil. He's like my neighbor almost. It was like a year ago, and he was talking about when he was growing up. You had mentioned like sports in the 90s versus now. So this is like decades even before that. Like playing on like a dinged up old, like a soccer field that's like one of the corners is like way lower. There's all sorts of ruts all over the place. Like, what are your thoughts on like the training environment? I think you had mentioned, I forget if it was on or off air, but like even have to do tryouts in like a half of an elementary school gym, or like just like your thoughts on the environment that you're doing the skills in, be it nature where there's maybe a lot of different variations, or just things like that with developing athletes or established ones.
Yeah. Again, the greatest athlete and again, this is my opinion, but there has been some talk about this over the years. So the greatest athletes have the ability to adapt and adjust to their situation, their environment. They adapt really, really well. And I think, again, kind of like Al was talking about, when I grew up in the 70s, and we played a lot of sports that were just made up. We had all different kind of sports that we made up, or even if we played basketball, we naturally built in constraints of our own. And we used to play on these outdoor courts because I grew up in northern New York in the Adirondacks. So, you'd get the frost, and then the court cement would buckle, and so you'd start playing, and next thing you know, your ball's taking a right-hand turn because you hit a bump on your outdoor courts. And we learned to play in environments that were not even close to ideal. But it was funny because back then we never gave it another thought. It was just what it was. You didn't question it. You didn't complain. Nowadays, if we don't have the absolute perfect net on the basketball, everybody's mad. And I'm like, we didn't have nets half the time. The ball came through and you got hit in the face because you weren't expecting it.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you get hit right in the face with the ball if you're under the basket.
Got to pay attention.
You got to be, it was like you really had to be ready even if your own teammate made it. But the thing is, what happens is when you're in those type of environments, like when you're out playing on slanted fields, on, my driveway growing up was stone and slanted. So if I shot like a 3-pointer, it made the basket like 11.5 feet high because my court went downhill. But you know what? That's what taught me touch. It taught me how to play. It taught me, force production. It taught me all these things. And I used that to adapt to when I got in the regular gym and a nice court and a nice basket and a nice ball and all that stuff. I think those adaptations that we go through in less than ideal environments, I think it's a piece of the puzzle that we often miss. And I'm a big fan of old time training. Like I'll watch old, Russian and Polish and Chinese old training that they would do, and the old equipment, the old buck horse and stuff like that they use to go through. And I think there's a tremendous value to that type of stuff where they had to figure things out and they still had to perform at a high level. So I think the pristine environment offers a disservice when sport gets ugly. And it gets ugly, right? It gets ugly at times. There's, you're playing really bad, or there's a hostile crowd or whatever. It's not ideal. Well, if you grew up in that environment and you were around it, you deal with it. It's just part of it. But, I think we have kids now that never get in that environment. They have everything perfect. They never go outside. I've taken my basketball team outside because when the hurricane hit, we couldn't get in for a long time. So we went to outdoor courts. Kids were shooting awful. I'm like, it's because you guys never learned to play outside. I said, I never got on an indoor court until it was basketball season. The other 7 months, we were outdoors on court. And that's how we learned to play. So, yeah, I do. I think it's a lot of value having less than perfect environment.
Yeah, 100%. I know I remember, speaking of like the old school, the Russians and Chinese, it was, I think, the Polish weightlifting team in like the 70s or something. There's a video of them.
Videos.
Yeah, out in the, I'll have to put in the show notes. They're out in the woods, like doing basically like parkour and like just, it's in the snow too or something.
I think like snow, going over logs and snow and ice and doing push-ups on trees. And
it's so good. And it's almost like, in addition to all the, you could take in the motor learning, okay, this is variable, this is, problem solving, but it's also just, I think we lose like story sometimes too. It's like you watch like Rocky, there's something like visceral about training in a tough environment and figuring it out. And like you're out in nature and you're have to figure out how to use a log or whatever. And it doesn't have to be like that for every kid, but like there's something that's also written in story that also exists there that I think we miss as soon as it's like, oh, everything's got to be perfect in this, this court or even in the weight room. It's like, I think a 4-week block of training out in nature, would be great for anybody. So.
I agree 100%. And it really does. And again, I think when the toughness comes, like the end of a game and, the tough guys and tough gals pull through, well, it's what they've been through. They've been through tough times and tough training. And they didn't have, I'm telling my boys right now, because it might have been off camera when we first talked. I just found out this morning. Today is opening day for us. This is the first day of tryouts, practice officially for Florida. And I didn't know where I was going to practice until about 20 minutes before you and I got on this call. I literally didn't know. And so my AD said, well, the lower campus has half of a gym. We have half of a small elementary gym with one basket, and I got 20-something boys. And so I reached out to the boys and I said, okay, we finally know where we're going to be. This is where it is, 6 to 7:30 tonight. And I said, come with no excuses. Okay, leave your excuses at the door. We're here to work out and play and practice and get better. The environment is what it is. We're not going to make excuses. And I said, I can promise you guys, we're going to have a chip on our shoulder when the season actually starts, because no one else that we're playing has had to deal with what we've had to do. And it was funny, all the boys, it's kind of like this group me platform where you can talk to your team, and they all like loved it, love, because they're all like, yeah, this is kind of, and you brought up Rocky, but it's kind of like that. I'm like, we're going into this small little gym that's tile floor. It's not even a real gym, it's the cafeteria. And I said, hey, it is what it is. We're going to get better today, and by tomorrow we'll be better than we were, the day before. So it's just that environment.
I wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about my story with our sponsor, Lost Empire Herbs. Several years ago, I had strongman and mental training expert Logan Christopher on the show, and in the interview, I realized that Logan, in addition to deadlifting over 500 pounds and ripping phone books in half, also was the founder of an herbalism company. Long story short, I ended up ordering the Phoenix formula, one of their flagship products, and in taking that, I noticed increased energy and a decreased reliance on coffee, which honestly, I was kind of expecting that. But what I didn't expect is after a few weeks, I noticed my weight room numbers had increased substantially. And the Phoenix formula also led me to getting Shilajit resin, which is found in the Phoenix formula and recommended by a lot of strength coaches, as well as other Lost Empire Herbs products. I've been using Lost Empire Herbs ever since, and I have sponsors of the show that I believe in, that I use, and that I want to share with you. So if you want to check them out, head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly for 15% off my favorite Lost Empire Herbs products. You get a 365-day money-back guarantee. I really enjoy having Lost Empire Herbs as a sponsor of this show, and I hope you get a chance to check out what they have to offer. Let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, those stories are always so cool. I'm excited to see too how your team does throughout the year, and it's like the more you overcome early on, if you have to overcome something, I think that's always really powerful. Versus it's like, especially too with like the the university like mentality, everyone's got to one up the other one with recruiting. Here's a better, nicer weight room. Here's better, nicer facilities, and this and that. And I don't know. I mean, on the high level of things, these athletes are already pretty established and whatever, but it does make you think, well, what if, 1 year, like you're at one of these big schools and like, you didn't have access to this field and you had to practice, but no one had a bad attitude about it. No one was like, I will say too, even being at Cal, that does make me think, is Cal has an amazing swim team. Like, I mean, they're, always at the top of the NCAAs, they have Olympians. And you go to like their pool versus like Stanford's across the bay. Cal's is so dingy compared to, I mean, it's like literally like, it looks like, I mean, it's still nice. I mean, at high school, I'd be like, oh, this is nice. But compared to Stanford or some of these other like nice D1 schools, it's really not that nice. And but it's almost like that fuels you, because it's like, we don't need this nice, super nice thing. Let's just get it done. And
Did you see the 60 Minutes on Deion Sanders?
I didn't know.
Yeah, catch that. It's 60 Minutes. They have multiple little episodes, and his was one. It was probably 10 minutes or 13 minutes, something like that. But I mean, they showed him having to take a bath in the pool because the water was down, and they have their weight room is awful. They're just nothing. But he's bringing in top recruits, and he's just the same mentality. He's like, hey, we're here to play. We don't care about this. We don't care about that. We're as good as anybody else. And his first year where they lose 2 games, and this year I think they're undefeated.
Oh, it's awesome.
They're just going in, and and he's got that mentality of, hey, we're just kind of that Rocky mentality. Just doesn't matter when game day comes, nobody cares, right? So go and play. But yeah, they have really poor facilities for Division I, but because of HBCU, they just don't have the money. So he's trying to change that, but there's that little edge to it. So almost like you don't want to change it too much. You don't want to get too comfortable,
Yeah, that's what it was. I think it was Daniel Coyle. It was like the Little Book of Talent. It was talking about the Spartan. If it's Spartan, it's just bare bones. It communicates to you that you haven't made it yet. If it's so nice, it's like, oh yeah, I made it. This is cool. Like if there's always something that says you haven't made it yet, like you got to overcome this. There's that thing in your head. I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that multiple times. I'll have to go check out that Deion Sanders documentary as well. It sounds
pretty
awesome.
Good. Pretty good.
I love it. Okay, so transitioning just a little bit. As you know, I asked you this before on a recent podcast, but I'd like to expand it a little bit. And I think you've been chatting about it already, but basically, when would you choose? I mean, it sounds like typically the go-to would be a game, something to compete in, something that the athletes will problem solve. But a few primers on, and like you said, you might blow the whistle and then stop briefly. Right. But just a little bit more on when you use games versus when you'd use or games or constraints versus actually get into the nitty gritty of coaching. Yeah. Just some general primers. What groups? What types of athletes? How does that break down for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we understand learning, that helps us. So for me, I want the younger kids to have as much problem solving and figuring out and just sampling of instruction versus a little bit more instruction when the athletes get a little bit older and they start to get higher grades, for lack of a better word, on their performances. So with the younger kids, I like to let them go, let them play, let them develop this diversity of movement, problem solving, and all these things. And so I'm going to limit how much instruction I give those kids simply because a lot of them don't have the cognitive levels to understand the current instruction model that's out there, which is often a little bit too beefy for these kids. You know what I mean? That's why I think, what helped me was having a physical education background where you kind of learn, the younger kids and how to talk to them and all. Now, once they start to get more competitive, in other words, they're playing on state-sanctioned teams, like high school team, or even a middle school team that plays a pretty competitive. Now we never, I don't care what level, even professional, I never want to take away the play-like instruction where they play, we let them try to problem solve. If we continuously see the same, maybe low-functioning movements or patterns or play decisions, okay, then we can start to dive in a little bit. But we can start to set up scenarios for them. We can give them more scenarios, like you mentioned, constraint, where the constraint leads my instruction. So without me saying a lot, I'm going to get what I want anyway because the constraint makes it happen. That's why we use constraint. But the athletes just are still playing. They just know maybe they can't go to that side of the field or that side of the court because of a constraint. We start to give that a little bit more. So now, Joel, let's say we're watching this team play and it's pretty competitive. And the missing link is some kind of quickness component or speed component. Or maybe we recognize a lack of strength. Now we get a little bit more into the nitty gritty, because if you and I have the tools to be able to solve those problems for those kids, meaning a little bit more strict speed training program, or a change of direction program, or an agility program, or a strength program, I think it's not doing our jobs not to access that skill set that we have. And we want to make it clear to the athletes doing this, because in context of the game, you struggled on the 50-50 ball. You're always a step behind, and that's okay. Now we're going to put in some speed training. Every training session, we're going to put some things in that are going to help promote you winning 50-50 balls, or you getting to tipped balls in volleyball because you're not strong enough to push off or whatever. So I think that's when it goes. So if we think intuitively as people, that doesn't make a lot of sense for the little kid. I'm not going to do a lot of that anyway. I'm fine with them, because there's no harm, no foul. Who cares if they're not that good yet? That doesn't really matter. But when you start to get like, I coach a varsity team, which is sanctioned by the state. In other words, we'll get a ranking, or we're going to compete for sectionals, regionals, districts, all that stuff. Well, then you owe it to the kids to give the best opportunities we can. So I think that dictates a lot of it. You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. But the funny thing is, I never get away from the play, because the play is my assessment. That's what I'm really seeing, because the kids are no longer doing what I told them to do. They're doing what comes to them. And that lets me say, okay, Joel doesn't like to plant on his left leg. He likes to go on his right leg all the time. He always turns, So now I can put in some correctives to help you with that. And but it gives you context. So yeah, so that's kind of how I would treat that.
I love that. It's so simple. It always goes back to play. And I just think that's where we live in such an atomized world, where it's like, oh, just get my kid faster. Well, what does it mean? Do you want them to run faster straight line? And that's awesome. I mean, I love the process of evolution. And I mentioned this to you before we started recording, is I love speed just because it's hard. It's not, it is probably the hardest ability to improve. It is not that hard to improve strength right away with kid. Just keep putting more weight on the bar. Or not kid, but once athletes are ready to lift weights, it's not hard to improve strength. But speed is hard, and that's why it's just intrinsically rewarding to me because of that. But if I have athletes, and then as I've started to now coach youth sports, you just see it's just all related to the perception and the ball and the skill and what happens in the sport itself. And being fast is nice, and early on you can use your speed as a weapon, but then eventually everyone else starts to catch up to you a little more with that game speed, and you have to relate it to how you play in some way, shape, or form. And I think too, a lot of kids, it probably is more meaningful to them than too. I mean, they do like getting faster. You roll out the timing system and they want to keep going. I want to beat my time because it's a game. It's a gamification. But it seems like it would be, just that system of play. If I'm not seeing what I want here, but let's get a constraint. I don't have to coach you. It's still play. And then finally, okay, this person is having some issues here with this. Let's now isolate this. But it's always related back. I just love that way of looking at it. That to me is such an intuitive model.
Yeah, I'll give an example. So the other day we were doing a drill in basketball, and one of our principles as we play is we try to get into the paint. Like, we try to get a touch in the paint with the ball, because if we can get in, usually things open up on the outside, or if people don't come in and help, we got a layup or we got a score. And to help my team understand it, I put less defenders. So we actually went 4-on-3. So now when they got in the paint, there was always someone open. And then they started to get the rhythm of, we penetrate to score, but if we're denied, we're looking for that open person. And it sped up their learning. And then when I went back to 4-on-4, they got it. They started to get it. They started to get the concept of let's get paint touches. And then what happened is the defense started to kind of stay out on their man, and then we started to finish layups. I said, there you go. Now you're reading it. And it was nothing more than me just giving them the opportunity to see what's possible by the constraint of less defenders, more offensive players. Let them feel it, let them see it. And then it made sense when they went 4-on-4. So that's an example of, it was still play. It wasn't over instruction. It was just, this is one of our goals, is we try to get in the paint as much as we can, because it opens up easy shots or open 3-pointers. And that, So that's an example of using a constraint to make it easier, but through play.
Yeah. Yeah, and the more I coach, I'm sure these these are going to be sticking with me as well. And the higher level I get, and the more those sub constraints of the sport itself I'll be using. For people too, on maybe the flip side, on some level, people who only work in a weight room setting or not the sport coaching. I am curious. You mentioned observing them play is the assessment, and so. For someone either who is a sport coach or a sports performance coach, obviously there's a lot of complexity with the movement. And I know you've talked about the different, there's the linking steps and these different sub movements. But if you were to distill down some of the key movements you're looking for that would tell me, okay, we're playing a game, or maybe I have a group, and let's just say this is a very general thing, but they're playing a warm-up game of soccer before we go train or lift. And I'm watching them play this warm-up game of soccer. What are some key things that you're looking for within that game that might tell you, hey, this guy or girl could use some more isolated work here? Thoughts on that?
And that's the ultimate assessment, right? Watch them, observe, notice. And what I think helps us as performance coaches, and this is why I've always talked, the more models we have in our mind as to what we would like to see movement look like, the easier it is for us to identify when something's not right. Because, for example, if we have a model of what it's like to change levels, maybe I'm running forward and I have to do kind of a lunge to get lower to pick up a ball on the ground, right? Maybe a baseball or softball's on the ground and I got to pick it up, or a football's on the ground, I got to pick it up, bend down. And I notice that athlete really struggles to actually use their dorsiflexion, knee flexion, and hip flexion to get down. They almost go stiff-legged and RDL it to get down there because they can't get there. Well, that's not the model that I would like to see of changing levels on a offset or a split stance position. That's not what I would want to see. So that helps me. So now maybe we're going to work on that. We're going to test some mobility. We're going to see what strength is like, or maybe there's pain. Maybe they're doing that because they have tendonitis in their knee, and it's like, I don't want to bend my knee. I'd rather bend over at my low back, and do it that way. So that's an example. When I see athletes change direction and they have where they could have just stuck their foot in the ground and pushed off that one plant, they take multiple plants. And I notice that every time they go to change direction, they're kind of like what I like to call swaying. So like a tree sways kind of over its base, its trunk. Well, if the shoulders sway outside that foot plant, it's really hard to get a quick change of direction out of that. So, okay, there's a really good kind of a assessment for me. Maybe the athlete lacks some internal rotation at the hip, so they kind of buckle and they get it by side flexing through the spine. Or maybe they're unable to get the foot wide enough because maybe they have a restriction, or they just haven't done it enough times. It's just a pattern that they've developed, a bad pattern, and now we got to work on that. So if we look at the models that we want to see, and if you gave a perfect example, warming up for a workout with a little bit of soccer, and go play, because soccer is different than most sports because you move your body in position to make a play with your feet. As with most sports, you move, make a play with your hands because we're catching or we're shooting or throwing or whatever. And so now we get to see how stable are they? How, can they stand on one leg and reach, or can they follow through across their body with a kick and have adequate range of motion? So that really gets to tell us a lot that we now can take to the weight room or the speed portion and work on some correctives to help those patterns.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned with soccer too. I know you've mentioned that in the past podcasts. Like anyone who's not a soccer player, like soccer is amazing. And I hadn't put two and two together with not you being able to use your hands until Adarian Barr had mentioned on the last podcast, like there's two different types of jumpers. You got athletes who are more lower body jumpers and then the more chest jumpers, like a volleyball player. They really get that extra bit out of their chest and shoulders right at the end, really rising those up to raise their center of mass right before their toes leave the ground. And that was like a kind of a mind blown moment for me because I was like, yeah, I'm all chest jumper. And but when I play And I know everyone gets this with sport. Like, you can jump higher when you use sport as a warm up versus going, I'm just going to do some skips and whatever. Like, sport is the great warm up. But I also think of it like, even when I played like racquetball, it's an amazing warm up for me. And I think about, and there's reaching there, but it's all stuff that's like, it doesn't let me use that kind of chest jumper cheat. It puts me in the ground and it makes it lower body oriented. And I have to, it like really like dials into that as I'm moving all over the place. And so that, it just kind of stuck that in my head there with soccer. Another benefit, because I'm so, and I have long arms too. I use that to my advantage for sport, super reachy. And it's nice to, the constraint that takes all that away and just dials it into what's happening from the shoulders down or the, the chest down.
Yeah. I've always said soccer is a great, great sport for young kids to play because of the footwork demands. You can't get lazy. You've got to you can be lazy, but when you're around the ball, you got to move your feet. Your feet have to be in position to play because it's not a hand thing. It's not bending over at your waist to get the ball. You got to use your feet.
Yeah, I would imagine that athletes you work with who played more soccer early on probably need less isolation than athletes who did not, who maybe grew up just playing, I don't know, whatever sport it was. I imagine there's probably some sort of like correlation, the more soccer you played, the less I need to work with you later on or something like that.
Yep, without a doubt. It's one of those sports that drives that athletic power and elasticity and that quickness and that agility that we would have to formulate in a training session. They get it anyway. They get it all the time. So and just look at their legs. Look at a soccer player. Not that basketball players don't. You get some that are, but you don't usually see like skinny legs on a soccer player.
No,
they're usually kind of like thick trunk, right? They just got these thick quads and their knees are, they got the muscle lower around the knee, but that's what they do the whole time. It's a different sport.
Yeah, it's like so often we're like, oh, well, this player doesn't have enough leg muscle. Let's do squats. And squats are great. Squats are amazing. But it's like, well, if I could get that by either they just play more soccer now. And again, that's not at that point, if you just play for a few warm-up games, it's not going to overhaul your leg muscles. It's like these people have been playing their whole life, but you grow up playing soccer, maybe you play it till you're 12, 13, and then you transition. Like that would be like a big, because it's like built in, it's like the chest jumper example. It's like built in the system. I can't use that upper body constraint. I have to really dial in on the legs and the footwork, and that's going to help speed that development forward. So it will complement a squat program too.
Certainly.
Lee, when you were talking about the soccer, so three things I gathered, like if I was watching soccer, you mentioned like level change. I know Ty Terrell, who I know you've mentored, mentioned that, like the ability to level change, like the elevator, then like extra steps. And so basically people who are like, too many like plinks and they can't make hard cuts. And then people whose shoulders sway to the outside excessively. Would you say, you'd mentioned, and I think this was a question I had, but kind of like hardware versus software, like level change, I imagine that's something that's more like a hardware thing. Like you need to learn to squat. Like I can't just tell you hey, just play with your hips slower. Like what's your take on some of that, like hardware versus software? Like I'm assuming you just probably would attack that from both directions. Here's the gym. And could you expand on that though? If like someone can't like level change or shift and how you hit it multi-directionally?
Right. And again, let's go back to the task and the environment that these kids get exposure with. And that's why I'm so big on sampling of sport and the difference of sports. So we were just talking a lot about soccer. And soccer does have a certain degree of level changes, but the one who has to do that the most is the goalie. Because the other players can't go down and stop the ball with their hand. As where softball, baseball, tennis, volleyball, back row players, they have to change levels constantly. And they have to be very stable and dynamic in those changes of direction. So the more we expose them to those types of things, today still, even when I warm up my kids, we do these things called roll and reaches that I've been using for years. And that's changing levels. And some of the kids initially struggle with it, but they're getting better at it because we do it every day. And the ability to change levels is dependent on a couple things. One of them is our active ability to access mobility. Can I get into my ankles? Can I pronate? Because people are afraid of pronation, but pronation is a loading parameter. That's why it's there. That's why I have an arch that's mobile. Can we get into our hip, and we know our knee has the mobility to get the levels we want. It's just, is it healthy enough? Does it have pain enough? But can we get there with our hip? And a lot of times with the hip, it's not just the flexion extension. It's can we access internal and external rotation to be able to sit down and still maintain maybe an upright posture and change levels that way. So by having kids sample these different sports and different activities and different warm-up protocols that require change of direction, it makes our job a lot easier when we try to get into the weight room, or like you said, dealing with hardware or software, where we can, one of them is more malleable than the other. One of them is kind of, it's kind of tough to change. But if we can get them in the weight room, build strength at these various levels, then I know. Let me give you an example. I was just talking to a coach a couple of weeks ago about this. So when I do jump landing, let's say we're doing a shock type of a jump or a depth jump landing, which for the listeners, we're coming off something, a box or a step, and we land. I have 3 levels that I usually make my athletes be able to land in. So either high, medium, or low. So low is they're going to land down near 90 degrees. Okay, they're going to try to get below 45 degrees in that range. But the thing is, they have to land there, not yield to there. So it would be like doing a cannonball in the water. You're tucked, and when you hit the water, you're already tucked. So when my athletes drop off, they have to tuck their knees up, land in that position. So when they hit the ground, they're already at that 45 or below. And then we have the medium, and then we have the high. And can they develop that ability to stabilize those level changes quickly? But I'm putting them at the level. I'm not allowing them to change level. But because they can control that deeper landing, I know they can change levels and get there and hold it, because that's easier. That's an easier thing. So that's an example of what I would do in the weight room or in our training facility to help kids be able to establish that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I know I'm a big fan of the low squat foot jumps. Like they're basically like where you're sitting in a chair like 90 degrees, not sitting in a chair exactly, but legs are at 90, hips are at 90, and you're just doing little hops up and down in that kind of lower position. And athletes,
those are fun, by the way.
Oh, amazing. I am such a fan of that one. Like that's become a huge staple for me. I mean, it was on my radar before, but every year it just grows on me. And I watch athletes who are not great at level changing, and they're always horrible. There's always something in the chain that's like screwing them up on that one. I'll have to like let them hold on a bench, or put them let them have bands that's hold them up or something. Or I'm like looking at their feet, and I'm like, what is? You're not pronating at all. Like I'm like, what is going on here? So that's that's just been a huge one for me. I was gonna ask you too about the roll and reaches. Can you describe that? You had mentioned you did that a lot. How does that work?
Yeah, so we with my basketball team, we do it with the basketball, but typically when I'm training athletes, we do it with a medicine ball. So imagine widening your feet, get them really wide, much wider than your shoulders. Now take a ball and put it down right below your center, right on the ground, right between your feet. And take your right hand, and you're going to roll it all the way to the outside of your left foot. And I'm going to take my right hand and reach across my body. So it's actually connecting my left all the way to the opposite side. And then we roll it back, and it crosses my other side. And then my left hand goes and gets it, pulls it back. So we're gliding side to side. So we have parameters for, if I'm dealing with like really tall athletes, this changes. But we have 6 feet, 7 feet, and 8 feet. 6 feet is we're doing what we call a closed technique. So my feet are straight ahead. Okay, so they're perpendicular to the way the ball is rolled. The open, which would be 7 feet, is when I roll it this way, Joel, I open my foot that way. And I reach across, but now my kneecap is pointing that way too. And I roll, then I open the other side. And then the 8 foot is the cross step. So if I roll it to my right foot follows it, and I open up and I cross over, and my right leg ends up reaching way out with my right arm. We roll it back. We kind of do a little skip step, and we do it on the other side. Tremendous mobility, keeps them low. If I'm doing it for a warm-up, our volume's kind of low, not real hard. But if I'm trying to get a metabolic effect with people and we train this, we might go with like a 10, 20-pound medicine ball, and we'll go for like 60 seconds, of doing that. And then they rest, and then we come back and we do it again. And now it becomes a truly metabolic workout. but the dynamic demands of it, especially for the adductors early on in the groin, and then eventually the hamstrings and the back as we start opening up because we're working that fascial system, is really, really good. And you don't need anything more than a ball. That's why we just use the basketball with our kids.
Yeah. Do you use that? I could see that being a gym warm up, but also like before practice. Like, do you use that with stuff like that with your basketball team before their practice?
Exactly. So we get the ball, and you know how you do the ball stuff, warming up. Well, we start high. This is changing levels, and we get lower. We wrap around our knees, and then we go to the reach and rolls. Put it on the ground because this is the lowest they're going to get. Now they got to get down, and I'll tell you, some of these teenage boys, they need this bad because they're just so tight, and especially the kids in a growth spurt, they're so tight. And so it's gentle, but it's challenging. It's challenging for them. So it's a really, really good exercise. And we have multiple angles you can do it at. There's many different, well, I'll show you sometime. There's many different ways you can do it. But for now, we just do it across our body and reach the opposite hand. So that lat and that fascial loop is connecting with my opposite leg and all the way right down to the outside part of that ankle.
Yeah, I know. Making things play-based, too. I just mentioned this on the last podcast with Rhett Larson, how Corey Schlesinger would do like if someone was doing an isometric lunge hold, which is kind of difficult, we'll let the player have a ball and dribble it. Like it keeps them in the process. And when we can add, like you said, always going back to play. Like to me, it seems like it could be, I don't know if you got the goniometer out and measure how much range of motion improvement, but honestly, I feel like it would be better. It's more effective if they get to have a ball while they're doing it. And it's like, there's still this play like element versus you're stretching. I'm like shaking my finger. People can say like, you're stretching, you're doing mobility. It's like, hey, here's the ball. Let's increase your, just like you said, gently working into that. To me, it seems like.
And doing the dribbling and stuff, that's perturbation.
Yeah.
Perturbations we know work. And I don't know if you can see, but in the corner here, I have a tramp. So there it is.
Yeah,
right
mini tramp. Yeah.
You got the mini tramp. And that's what we do. We'll have the kids in an ISO lunge and they chest pad.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll tell them, you got to give me 50 reps. And they go blah, 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 as fast as they can to get it done. But they're holding that position the whole time. And that's what it is. So, yeah.
It becomes a game because they want to get the 50 done as fast as they can so they can get out of it. Unless you want to be in it for 3 minutes, it's nice and slow, nice and easy. I'll have to use a basketball on a brick wall or something. I don't have a mini tramp, but I'll have to try something like that next time. I Tuesdays and Fridays are usually my ISO lunge and sprint days, so I'll do the ball next time for the warm up on that one.
Good.
Love it. Okay, just a few more questions for you here, Lee. And so, one thing you had mentioned was high velocity. And I've been thinking about that where you talk about velocity cleaning things up, like we talk about constraints. And I do want to keep this relatively general. So maybe, examples for either the sport coach or the sport coach or the strength coach. I see this with coaching youth soccer. Like I'll see 6-year-olds who they're not great at soccer yet. Like they don't have a lot of control, but they're fast. Like they're always flying around the field. And I remember as I'm coaching, I'm remembering what you're saying. Honestly, just observing them. I'm not trying to really change anything, but that kid's going to start, the skill will catch up at some point. Like that, they will get more control over time. And so I'm starting to see it. Like as I coach more sports, it's starting to make sense to me. But I'm within those constraints, like, and maybe you could use basketball as an example, or maybe it's just a game for warm up or like a speed type thing. But I'm curious thoughts on speeding up the velocity through a constraint, just from like a practical example, because I'm kind of seeing it now with the kids, and I'm just curious how to do that in context of just everyday.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm telling you, I know this from personally because my friends and myself, when we grew up, we didn't have people like us. Like we didn't have performance coaches. You play it, and you had a coach for that sport, and they, you just play. But man, did we do competitions and chasing and stuff all the time, and we were all pretty fast. We just because we did it all the time as young kids, and we talk about this window of opportunity of growth and development and central nervous system and all this stuff. Whatever. But the bottom line is, at a young age, it just makes sense to get exposure to increasing limb movement, which increases ground contact variables, right? And it increases extension flexion of our movement. And we learn to pull our legs through faster as we get back. So all that stuff becomes dynamically developed. So one thing we'll do with our kids in basketball, for example, and I did this when I coached rec soccer, is I'm guarding you, or in soccer, I'm marking you. And you're going to go around this cone, or you're going to kick a goal, but you can't do it until you pass this cone, right? So that way you have to dribble a little bit. Well, this could be basketball. I start behind you, okay? And I can't go until you go. So what's happening here is you got this kind of nervous anxiety of this guy behind you trying to catch you, but you know you got to go fast. And even though your skills of dribbling the soccer ball or a basketball aren't that tuned yet, you're still working on a level of speed. Well, my job is to try to catch you and to disturb your shot, either knock the ball away or at least get in front of you so you don't have a clean shot. So we're both working on speed. You're working on speed despite having maybe low levels of ball control yet, but I'm not over concerned about that because that'll come in another day. Mm-hmm. I can do that, and I can work on ball control anytime. But I want you to be fast, and I want you to learn that in order to be fast, you have to have control of that ball. And because you're young, we have time. It's not, you're a college player, okay, that's a little different story, right? Mm-hmm. But at a young age, that's okay. The skill will catch up, but the speed we got to develop because speed is just unbelievable. And you know this, when you work with young kids, if there's somebody that's a lot faster, they dominate. They just run by everybody. They get to everything, and they're like little buzzsaws all over the place. And so we'll do activities like that all the time. We have another one where we do this when we're trying to get to the basket. I'm on offense. I'm behind you, and you're facing the basket. I put the basketball right on your back. When I'm ready, I take it off, and I drive either side. You don't know which way I'm going because you're looking straight ahead. You just feel the ball coming off. So let's say I come off and I take off to the left. I'm trying to get to the basket. Well, you don't know until you see me because I'm already got a head of steam. You got to try to cut me off. Again, those are those reactive acceleration speed components that we really want to develop. And we let the skill be part of it. But we're really after that quick reactive acceleration, that quick starting speed. So those are kind of activities that we like to do that challenge the speed, the movement of the athlete. Even if it makes them struggle, it gives them context as to why when we do a little bit more of a closed dribbling drill to get better, why we're doing it. Because you struggled in a live drill, so let's give you a chance to do it, and then we'll go right back to the live drill.
Yeah, I love that. It's give me good ideas too for as I keep growing in my coaching and the age groups get older and older as well. And I was just thinking about as you were talking, there was a drill. Someone sent me this on Instagram or something. It was like a basketball warm up where they played tag, and it was like, but you had to. It was pass tag, so you had to pass, just pass the ball. There was like one or two people running around you, and you were chasing them by passing it to your teammate, and you had to like tag them with the ball. So it was almost like less strategic than basketball in a way, and there were not defenders. It was literally just high velocity, overspeed passing. And I was like, how cool would that overspeed passing drill be if you were going to go then do, a regular, you just wanted to get your team passing faster. Okay, let's overspeed this, and now we'll go back into our set. And even obviously, again, not everyone listening is dealing directly with sport coaching, but even in speed, I think you could do it. Like if I'm trying to teach, or track and field, if I'm trying to teach someone to hurdle, I could start with like a low hurdle and have them just race somebody who doesn't have hurdles next to them, and we'll just figure it out. The form is going to get there. And I would coach kids like that 100%, like rather than, all right, we're going to do all the drills. And it's just like, no, just run you're a sprinter if you're a hurdler. Like it's not like, second rate. A lot of times it becomes, the people who weren't fast enough, you just go hurdle and do all the drills. But at time in parkour, like watching kids do parkour, doing that myself, seeing how people learn to hurdle in nature and hurdle over trees, like just do it. Or you could even do it for like mini hurdles. Like one person runs, I had kids do this for youth track. One person runs over mini hurdles and they race someone who doesn't, or they both race over mini hurdles or whatever. Like it's a race. It's not, I'm not sitting there telling them to do X, Y, Z. It's just go solve it over speed. And then, it'll just kind of materialize. Or Rhett Larson, I'm sure you've probably done this too, but like you said, with the medicine ball, like speed medicine ball, 10 seconds, how many tosses, or you're stuff like that where,
definitely.
Yeah, just
that stuff is again, it goes back to one of the original questions. Competition is so important, even if it's not against an opponent.
Yeah.
It's just yourself. How many, 10 seconds. How many, we do this drill in here. I have the boxes are actually right next to me. They're about 2.5 inches. And I did this with some of my varsity players over here the other day training, and they have to jump. It's real simple, like pogos, on and off as fast as they can. I give them 7 seconds. Who can get the most?
Mm.
And oh my gosh, they go at, let's go one more time. I get you. And they want to do it again, and it's just going on. And then that's our linear work, all right? And then when we stand on top of it and they go on and off, straddling it, that's our lateral. We do the same thing, 7 seconds. Highest I had ever gotten was 21 seconds. Well, I had two kids break it. One of them got 23, one got 22.
Wow.
But they went after it. Like they were going, and they were good athletes. But man, it was fun. It was, they kind of bragging rights on a little simple drill with a 2-inch box. They were kind of going after each other after. And it's just, that's what it's all. It was fun. It was play, but I was getting exactly what I wanted, that reactive ground contact, so it was great.
Yeah. You said that making it a competition early in this podcast. And I love how you've kept going back to that and just seeing how that unfolds through all the elements of training. And then with the, even the basic, as a simple little drill, even pogos up on and off a box. As soon as you make it a competition, it's like, yeah. Everything gets escalated. Well, speaking of which, so a competition, I wanted to close this out, Lee. I know, I love the process of long-term development, youth sports to high school to college. And I think if people listening, a lot of people have kids or will have kids. And so, this is something that, to me, it doesn't necessarily plug right into the session that you are doing with the athletes in front of you, but it's everything that encapsulates it, which is youth sports to middle school to high school. And I know you've been really speaking on like the travel ball epidemic and trying to think of more even than just saying, oh, this is, hurting kids the way this is structured, having something that can change it. And so I would just love if you could just briefly touch on that and how to capture the pure form of competition, as you've spoken of so much through this podcast. Just a little bit of your thoughts on that before we get out of here.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share, because this is a real passion of mine, and it has been for 20 plus years. But over the last year, I've really found it, because I was getting tired of people saying, oh, yeah, that's cute, Lee, you go on with that. But I really have been almost obnoxious, because I felt like I had to get people emotional and almost mad at me. And several did, but most of those people kind of turned the corner when they really saw what I was looking at, because I was the squeaky wheel that was making them say, oh, yeah, there was like 3 fights at our last AAU kids, and my kid was frightened at that. So now they're starting to see what I'm talking about. It's a pretty angry, violent environment right now overall. I know there's good times, but so here's my thoughts on this. The ultimate goal as a parent is I want my kid to be happy, healthy. I want him to improve. I want him to develop skill-wise and tactically. So I want him to improve. I don't care the sport. You can plug the sport in. I want him to get better at it. We currently think, because the loudest, noisiest people are the AAU organizers, because they make a lot of money off it. And so they are preaching, you got to do AAU, you got to be on these travel teams, you got to pay in these tournaments, you got to do this and that. Well, I'm sitting here saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, because these kids are not getting better. They're just spending a lot of money. And some of the kids don't even get a lot of playing time, because they have these 9-year-old elite travel teams where
everything's elite.
Everything's elite, right? And not every kid gets to play, because the coach wants to win rather than develop. So my model is there's no reason we can't have competitions with small-sided games, such as 3-on-3s, or maybe soccer 4-on-4. And we have small fields, and we create environments where they're fairly local. We stay local so that parents aren't spending, $5,000 to $10,000 over the course of 6 to 7 months of all this travel and expenses. Keep it local. We want to have competitions that are one day. So parents don't have to leave Friday night, get in a hotel, play an 8:00 game, stay there all day, then play the Sunday, consolation game, and then drive home. So they played 5-6 games in a weekend. They're exhausted. Everybody's mad. We don't need that. That's not developmentally sound. And we would never do that in any other aspect, but we accept it in youth sport. So we go one day, 2 games. And this would be more along the line of basketball, even soccer to a degree. Certain games might be a little different. But if we can start like 3-on-3 tournament, where a lot of times games are like 10 to 15 minutes long because they're very fast paced. There's different rules to a regular 3-on-3. And then you sit, and then the other teams play, you come back and you play again, and stuff like that. And then you have competitions at the end. And what I would like to do, rather than having these tournaments where there's hundreds of teams, you get like 16 teams and you play. Each team plays twice, and then at the end, you have a 2-minute competition game, a 2-minute tournament. Your team versus my team. Winner goes home, or winner stays, loser goes home. And then you play, and they're only 2-minute games, and they are fun. We've done these before, and the parents love it. The other part to this, Joel, that I don't think organizers do at all, and this is why there's so many problems. When I was doing these things in Indiana with our little local stuff, I would talk to the parents and I'd say, this is for the kid. You're a guest. If you yell, if I hear you cursing, you're gone. This is your warning. You're not going to get another one. Don't take your kid's moment. Let them play. And so I would announce it. And if it happened, I'd go talk to the parent. And some of the parents would go, my fault. I apologize. It's okay. Don't let it happen again as long as you got it. And then the kids relax. The coaches and the officials relax. And then the other part was I said, we don't always need officials because officials cost money. And if we're trying to save money, there's no reason I can't stand on the sideline and my coach that I'm going against does it. And the kids can call an out of bounds. Like if the ball goes out of bounds on somebody, hey, it's out on you. That's what we do every day at recess and at playground pickup games. And make it more about the experience of playing. And then lastly, all the money goes to that school or facility, not the organizers. Because what happens is when the organizers want to make money, the schools know that, so they jack their rental prices up. So then the organizers have to raise their prices, and then it costs $20 per parent to get into a game. My process was, let's say we're going to charge $200 or less per team come in and play. All the money goes to the school to help their athletics, to help everything. The parents can get in for under $5. They can come in and watch, and the concession goes to the school. So it's actually helping these schools and these facilities have fun, and coaches aren't making the money, organizers aren't making the money, the schools are that are willing to open up their schools. Now you have schools that are more willing to be a part of this solution of helping youth sports rather than keeping this kind of crazy, angry model that we currently have. And it works. It's just that people are like, it's not going to work. We have to, because you don't want to try it. That's why it's not working for you. But if you're willing to try it, everybody just starts to relax. And we realize, hey, it's about the kid anyway. They're going to be a pro. You're going to know it, right? You're going to know that anyway. Not, a weekend tournament doesn't determine that or not. That's already there. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. And that's what we're trying to promote and get people to understand. Let's relax. This is youth sports, and allow sampling of other sports. Don't play 12 months a year of one sport, get them in other sports.
Yeah, I think the theme of that too fits with everything we've been saying, which is it's fun, games, and community. And the games are exposure, like the games that you are exposed to all sorts of situations and skills, not just like in a smaller sided game. So it's like, it's kind of encapsulating everything we've talked about thus far. It's just now how do you organize that in the community? And I just think that's really powerful. Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome, Lee. Well, hey, thank you so much, man. It's awesome talking to you. I'm so excited for my next coaching season and just obviously normal performance training as well. You give me so many great ideas. Super inspiring to chat with you. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find more about you, that league you're talking about, as well as just other information?
Thank you. Yeah. If they go to basketballgamemodel.com, you can find it there. Or if they go to leetaft.com, they can use, that's kind of like the mothership of all our stuff, and they can find stuff there. And I'm pretty active at Lee Taft on any social, just trying to share ideas. But yeah, that would be where they could find stuff, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, thank you again, Lee. Really great.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks for listening. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.